Megan Carter had the perfect life, and Evan Blake was the dangerous secret she never let go. Until their twisted reunion ended in cold-blooded murder, Megan Carter appeared to have it all. Her life in Pinebrook, Illinois, was the kind most people admired from a distance. She lived in a beautiful two-story home with a manicured lawn and seasonal decorations that made the neighborhood feel like something out of a magazine. Her husband, Daniel Carter, was the kind of man people respected. As the principal of Pinebrook High School, he was known for his dedication to education, his calm demeanor, and the way he spoke lovingly about his family during school events. Their two children, ages 6 and 9, were well-behaved, polite, and always dressed in matching outfits in their family photos. To outsiders, the Carters were the kind of family others aspired to be, but perfect images often hide the most broken truths. Behind the closed doors of the Carter household, the cracks in the foundation were growing deeper. Megan had started to feel more like a housekeeper than a wife. Her days revolved around cooking meals, driving the kids to school, attending parent-teacher meetings, and keeping the house spotless for dinner at 6. Daniel was rarely home before dark. His job demanded long hours, and when he did come home, he was often too tired to talk, let alone connect. Megan missed the excitement they once shared, the laughter, and the sense of adventure. Somewhere along the way, they had become strangers living in the same house. That it wasn't that Daniel was cruel or unkind. He was a good man, just not the man Megan needed anymore. Their conversations had become transactional. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? Who's taking Lily to piano practice? The warmth had faded, and Megan felt herself drifting further into loneliness with each passing week. She didn't complain. She smiled at neighbors, posted cheerful photos on social media, and told herself it was just a phase. But in the quiet hours, when the kids were asleep and the house was still, Megan began to feel the weight of her dissatisfaction pressing down on her like a storm cloud that refused to move. One night, after putting the kids to bed and pouring herself a glass of wine, she found herself scrolling through Facebook. At first, she was just looking at old photos, school friends, and vacation memories. Then, almost without thinking, she typed his name into the search bar, Evan Blake. Her first love. They had dated during high school, breaking up just before college when life took them in different directions. Megan had always remembered him fondly, even after all these years. There had been something magnetic about Evan. He was confident, wild, and completely different from anyone else she had ever met. To her surprise, his profile appeared immediately. He was living in a nearby town, not even an hour away. Recently divorced, no kids. His profile picture showed him at a gym, looking fit and strong, with that same familiar smirk she remembered from her teenage years. Without thinking it through, she clicked Add Friend. Within minutes, he accepted the request. A message followed almost instantly. Just a simple hey. Long time. That night, Megan stayed up until nearly 2 in the morning, messaging Evan. The conversation flowed effortlessly, like no time had passed at all. They laughed about high school memories, shared stories about their lives, and confided in each other about where things had gone wrong. Megan didn't tell Evan everything. She left out the parts about feeling trapped and unfulfilled, but he seemed to understand her loneliness without needing the details. Over the next few days, their conversations became a regular part of her routine. She'd wait for the kids to leave for school, then check her phone for his messages. Her heart raced every time his name popped up on the screen. What started as a simple reconnection slowly turned into something more dangerous. Megan began dressing up just to take selfies to send him. She became more distant at home, avoiding Daniel's questions and making excuses to step away for phone calls. Her world, which had once revolved around routine and responsibility, was shifting towards secrecy and anticipation. Evan made her feel seen again, alive even, and she wasn't ready to let go of that feeling. It didn't take long before they agreed to meet in person. a quick lunch at a diner halfway between their towns. It was supposed to be harmless, just two old friends catching up. But that lunch turned into long walks, late-night calls, and stolen kisses in parking lots. Megan knew it was wrong. She knew she was putting everything at risk. But she told herself it was temporary, a harmless distraction, something she deserved after years of feeling invisible. She didn't see it yet, but this was only the beginning. Her decision to click that friend request was about to unravel everything she thought she had under control. That Megan's secret meetings with Evan became the highlight of her days. What had started as an online reconnection quickly evolved into a full-blown affair. They began seeing each other weekly, always in discreet locations, always during hours when Daniel was at work and the kids were at school or with Megan's sister. At first, they were careful. Megan used excuses that sounded harmless. Lunch with a friend, errands that took longer than expected, volunteer meetings. No one questioned her. She had spent years building a reputation as a reliable wife and mother. That image gave her the perfect cover. Evan, too, was enjoying the thrill of their hidden romance. His divorce had left him bitter and lonely, and reconnecting with Megan felt like a second chance at something he had never truly let go of. They fell back into each other with alarming ease. He often told her that it felt like they had never broken up, as if the years in between had just been a pause. Megan didn't disagree. When she was with Evan, the weight of her home life disappeared. She felt young again, desired and spontaneous. He said all the right things, told her she deserved more, that she was beautiful, that he would have treated her better if they had stayed together. The affair soon became emotional as well as physical. Megan began confiding in Evan about her frustrations with Daniel, about the loneliness she felt in her marriage. Evan listened closely and offered comfort. But what Megan didn't realize was that her complaints were feeding something dangerous. In Evan, he wasn't just listening. He was planning. Evan started asking questions about Daniel. What kind of man was he really? Did he suspect anything? What would happen if the truth came out? Megan tried to brush it off, insisting they were being careful, but Evan's tone had shifted. He wasn't content with stolen hours anymore. He wanted more. He wanted Megan full-time. At first, Megan resisted the idea of leaving her husband. Divorce would be messy and expensive. She didn't have her own income and worried about how it would affect her children. She had grown up in a broken home herself and didn't want to put her kids through that. Plus, Daniel wasn't a bad man. He wasn't abusive. He didn't cheat. He just wasn't enough anymore. But how could she justify tearing her family apart for something as reckless as an affair? Evan didn't see it that way. He began planting seeds, telling Megan that she deserved to be happy, that staying for the kids was just an excuse, that Daniel would never change. Slowly, her resolve began to weaken. She found herself imagining a different life, one where she and Evan lived together in a cozy home, where the kids adjusted and eventually understood, where she didn't have to sneak around or lie anymore. The fantasy was seductive. Still, there were problems. Megan began to notice that Evan was more possessive than she remembered. He would text her constantly, and if she didn't reply quickly enough, he'd accuse her of avoiding him. When she was with Daniel, he'd get jealous and demand proof that she wasn't lying. Megan started to feel cornered. The excitement was fading, and in its place, a darker energy was settling in. The tension between them grew whenever the topic of Daniel came up. Evan hated that Megan hadn't told her husband yet. He saw it as a sign she wasn't serious. She tried to explain her fears, the potential fallout, but Evan wasn't interested in excuses anymore. His tone turned cold. He began saying things like, "He's in the way," or "We'd be free if he was gone." Megan laughed it off at first, thinking he was joking. But as the weeks passed, Evan brought it up more often and more seriously. Point one. Evening, after a tense conversation, Evan sent Megan a text that made her stomach twist. "You know what we need to do. He's the problem. If he's gone, everything falls into place." Megan stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't respond. She didn't know how, but she didn't block him either. Deep down, a part of her wondered, what if he was right? She didn't see herself as a violent person. She had never even imagined harming someone. But the longer she lived in secrecy, the more tangled her thoughts became. She was lying to her husband, her children, her family. The life she had built felt like a prison, and Evan was offering a key. All it would take was one decision, one step into the darkness. And once that line was crossed, there would be no turning back. The affair between Megan and Evan had reached a point of no return. Every day, the lies grew heavier and the risk of discovery loomed larger. Megan knew that continuing this double life couldn't last forever, but she also couldn't bring herself to walk away from Evan. The thought of returning to her cold, quiet marriage with Daniel felt unbearable. Evan, on the other hand, was growing increasingly demanding. He wanted Megan to himself, completely. He wasn't content with weekend meetings and secret texts anymore. He wanted a future, and he didn't want to share it with anyone, especially not Daniel. Their conversations took on a darker tone. Evan began talking seriously about removing Daniel from the picture altogether. At first, Megan dismissed these remarks as the emotional outbursts of a jealous lover. But Evan wasn't joking. He repeated the idea often, calmly, almost methodically. He said they had been given a second chance, and they shouldn't waste it. Megan was torn. The idea was unthinkable, but so was going back to the life she had come to resent. She convinced herself that she wasn't agreeing, just listening. That line of thinking made her feel less guilty, even as she allowed Evan to keep talking. Evan began asking detailed questions. What was Daniel's daily schedule? When did he leave for work? Did he go to the gym? Where were the kids during the week? What kind of security did they have at home? Megan answered the questions gradually, cautiously. She told herself it was only to get Evan to stop pushing. But the truth was, a part of her wanted to know the answers too. She began noticing things she had never paid attention to before. How long Daniel's morning runs lasted, which nights he stayed late at school board meetings, and when the kids had overnight stays at their aunt's house. The plan started to form slowly, almost without anyone admitting that it was a plan. Evan would take care of it. Megan wouldn't have to be there, wouldn't have to see it happen. That was how he framed it. Clean, simple, quick. He promised her that it would look like a burglary gone wrong. Nothing to link back to either of them. He said he would wear gloves, leave no trace, be in and out before anyone noticed. Megan didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. A date was chosen. Thursday, October 3rd. Daniel would be home alone. Megan had already planned to take the kids to her sister's house for the weekend. She told Daniel it was a chance for him to relax and unwind after a stressful school term. He appreciated the gesture, unaware it had been carefully timed for his murder. Megan packed the bags with extra care that day, forcing smiles for her children, double-checking every detail. Her heart raced the entire drive to her sister's house. Every mile she put between herself and her home felt like a step towards something irreversible. Back in Pinebrook, Evan waited. He had spent days preparing. He had bought a burner phone, used it only to communicate with Megan, and then destroyed it. He had stolen license plates from an abandoned vehicle in a scrapyard and attached them to his car. He had packed gloves, a change of clothes, and a knife. According to later police reports, he parked several blocks from the Carter home that night and walked the rest of the way, avoiding security cameras and taking side streets. Megan didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in her sister's guest room, staring at the ceiling. Her phone was on silent, but she checked it every few minutes anyway. Evan didn't message. Hours passed in silence. She wanted to believe maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he couldn't go through with it. Maybe everything would go back to the way it was. The next morning, she got the call that a neighbor had found Daniel's body. The front door was slightly open. The inside of the house was a mess, with signs of a struggle. Daniel had been stabbed multiple times and left to die in the living room. Megan's screams over the phone were convincing. Her sister drove her back immediately. Police arrived within minutes. Crime scene tape went up. Neighbors gathered, shocked. No one could understand how something so brutal could happen in such a peaceful neighborhood. Megan stood by, crying, shaking, hugging her children tightly. No one suspected her. She played the grieving wife perfectly. But deep inside, she knew. This wasn't the end of the nightmare. It was only the beginning. The investigation into Daniel Carter's murder began with confusion and urgency. Pinebrook had never seen a crime like this, brutal, personal, and completely out of place in the calm, suburban neighborhood. Daniel wasn't involved in anything dangerous. He was well-liked, respected, and had no known enemies. His murder felt random, and for the first 48 hours, police treated it like a possible home invasion gone wrong. Nothing was stolen, but the signs of a struggle and the violent nature of the attack raised questions. It didn't fit the profile of a robbery. It felt deliberate. Detectives began interviewing neighbors, family, co-workers, and friends. Megan, as Daniel's wife, was naturally one of the first people questioned. She played the grieving widow convincingly. She cried on cue, shook her head in disbelief, and offered every detail she could think of. She said she and the kids were out of town visiting her sister, which was true. Her alibi seemed solid. But as investigators dug deeper, small inconsistencies began to surface. Security cameras in the neighborhood provided the first crack in the case. A motion-activated camera across the street captured a figure walking away from the Carter house late at night. The person wore dark clothes and kept their head down, but the footage clearly showed a vehicle parked several houses down. Its license plates were covered, but the shape and model of the car gave police a lead. Just a few miles away, a gas station camera caught the same vehicle filling up hours before the murder. This time, the plates were visible, registered to Evan Blake. When detectives brought Evan in for questioning, he denied everything. He claimed he hadn't seen Megan in months. But when police obtained a warrant to search his apartment, they found pieces of evidence that unraveled his entire story. A backpack hidden in a closet contained a bloodstained shirt, gloves, and a hunting knife. Evan's internet search history was damning. How to erase fingerprints, how to stage a break-in, and worst of all, detailed searches about Daniel Carter himself. They also recovered a second phone hidden under the floorboards. This one was used exclusively to contact Megan. Once confronted with the evidence, Evan's story fell apart. He shifted from denial to blame. He claimed that Megan had orchestrated the whole thing, that she manipulated him, pressured him, and promised a life together if Daniel was removed. He said she had been unhappy for years and wanted freedom. Investigators weren't quick to believe him, but they needed more proof. They subpoenaed Megan's phone records and began analyzing every message, call, and deleted file. What they uncovered turned suspicion into certainty. The messages between Megan and Evan told a chilling story. For months, they had been in constant contact. Thousands of texts were recovered, including ones where they discussed Daniel's routines, the timing of his meetings, and even arguments between Megan and her husband. Most damning were the messages from the weeks leading up to the murder, coded, careful, but unmistakably suggestive of a plot. Phrases like, "the window is open and everything is in place," left little room for interpretation. Police also recovered photos Megan had sent of the inside of her house, highlighting the entrances and exits. She had even texted Evan a rough layout of the home. The case against Megan solidified when they traced a series of deleted files from her phone's backup. Among them was a document labeled Life Plan, in which she outlined financial goals, a list of future home ideas with Evan, and, disturbingly, a breakdown of Daniel's life insurance policy. Investigators discovered that if Daniel died, Megan would receive nearly $500,000. It became clear that love wasn't the only motive. Money played a role too. When Megan was brought in for a second round of questioning, her demeanor changed. Gone was the shattered widow. She appeared nervous, guarded, her answers shorter and less convincing. When presented with the recovered messages and digital records, she stopped talking altogether. Her silence spoke louder than words. Shortly afterward, both Megan and Evan were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and criminal conspiracy. The news of the arrests shocked the community. No one could believe that the smiling wife and dedicated mother they had known for years was capable of planning her husband's death. The truth shattered the illusion of the perfect family. Megan had played her part well, but the evidence was overwhelming that Daniel's funeral was held a week after the arrests. It was a quiet, somber ceremony attended by colleagues, students, neighbors, and family, most of whom were still in disbelief. His children sat quietly, unaware of the full extent of what had happened. In the eyes of the community, the Carters had gone from an ideal family to the center of a gruesome and calculated crime. The case would soon head to trial, but the most horrifying details had already come to light. What had looked like a loving marriage was nothing more than a mask. Behind it was betrayal, manipulation, and a willingness to destroy a life for the sake of selfish desire. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Megan Carter's trial. Reporters filled the benches, neighbors gathered outside the courthouse, and family members sat in tense silence. What had once been a local tragedy was now national news. The story had everything: an affair, a respected school principal murdered in his own home, and a wife at the center of it all. Megan arrived in handcuffs, dressed in pale blue jail-issued clothing, her once polished appearance replaced by a tired, hollow stare. She barely looked up as the charges were read: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. The prosecution came prepared. Over the course of the trial, they laid out a devastating timeline of events, showing how Megan and Evan had reconnected, reignited their relationship, and slowly built a plan to kill Daniel. They presented message after message between the two, many recovered even after being deleted. The language might have been vague, but the intent was clear. Prosecutors emphasized how Megan had not only supported Evan's desire to eliminate Daniel, but had also provided detailed information that made the crime possible. The courtroom gasped as the prosecution revealed the life insurance policy. Megan was listed as the sole beneficiary of a $500,000 payout. A financial motive gave the jury a concrete reason to believe the murder wasn't just an emotional decision. It was calculated. The jury heard how Megan had told friends months earlier that she felt trapped and that her life was on hold. These phrases, once thought to be casual venting, now painted a picture of deep resentment and potential motive. Evan Blake was also called to testify. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to testify against Megan. His appearance was unshaven and grim. He spoke calmly, but his words were chilling. He described how Megan had first suggested, "What if Daniel wasn't around?" He claimed she had offered him money after the murder, although no payments were ever found. Evan said that he loved Megan and that he believed they were going to build a life together once Daniel was out of the picture. His testimony was laced with bitterness. He admitted to carrying out the murder, but insisted that Megan was not just aware of it. She was the one who pushed him forward when he hesitated. Megan's defense painted a different picture. Her lawyers claimed she had been manipulated by Evan, that she was a vulnerable woman trapped in a failing marriage and lured into an affair by a man who took advantage of her emotional state. They argued that the messages were taken out of context, and that while Megan may have entertained fantasies, she never gave real approval for murder. They tried to show that Evan acted alone, driven by jealousy and obsession, and used Megan's unhappiness to justify his crime. But the jury didn't see it that way. Too much evidence pointed to Megan's knowledge and involvement. She had lied, repeatedly, deleted messages, provided information that only someone close to Daniel would know, and maintained contact with Evan even after his behavior became increasingly unhinged. Her silence when confronted with the evidence during police interviews only deepened the suspicions. After 6 weeks of emotional testimony, forensic analysis, and hours of digital evidence, the jury reached a verdict. Megan Carter was found guilty on all counts. She showed little emotion as the verdict was read, just a slight quiver in her jaw. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Evan Blake, who had taken a plea deal in exchange for his cooperation, was sentenced to 30 years with the chance of parole after 18. Neither would ever live outside prison walls together, and the fantasy they had built had destroyed them both. In the aftermath of the trial, the community of Pinebrook struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Daniel's sister was granted custody of the children and later changed their last names to protect their identities. The house where Daniel was killed was sold quietly to a couple from out of state. Those who had once admired Megan for her seemingly perfect life now spoke of her with disbelief and anger. In the end, the story served as a haunting reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Behind the smiles and well-kept lawns, behind the matching family photos and PTA meetings, a secret had grown, one rooted in discontent, betrayal, and ultimately murder. The cost of that secret was a man's life, 2 broken families, and a community forever scarred by the truth they never saw coming.